Thank you all so much for being with us today. We are talking about sustainable production, and that flows into a lot of different areas of business and production and film and the world, and so those are the things we get to chat about today. I'm Jacqueline Fabricius. I have the pleasure of being one of the people who runs 11th Hour Productions, and I am going to let our incredible speakers introduce themselves really quickly.
Thanks, Jacqueline. I'm Ram, everybody, and thank you for putting all this together and for inviting me on. I'm the CEO of Terra Productions. We're a transnational production company that focuses on development, finance, equity financing, and packaging.
I'm Matthew. I'm co-founder of Cerca Cultivation, co-founder, co-owner, and chief operations officer. Our mission is to help people grow food where they live, learn, work, and eat. We do that in two main ways. One is in-person services, so that's design, consultation, education, maintenance of edible garden spaces in the LA, Orange County, and Ventura areas. Our other area that we fulfill our mission in is through our nursery. So we sell plants nationwide through our online e-commerce nursery. And yeah, we're super mission driven. Every decision that we've made as a company, including how we incorporated from the beginning as a California benefit corporation, has been focused on sustainability and community impact. So I'm hoping that from someone outside of the film industry, I can have some things to add in that might translate over.
He's also one of the owners of 11th Hour.
Awesome. That's
Good. Hi, my name is Sandi Hendry. I am the owner and founder of Minky Couture blankets, best blanket ever. I started this company in 2009, and I wanted to focus on an ordinary product, which is a blanket, and how could I make it extraordinary, touch the lives of people and change lives when something so simple is sometimes overlooked. I thought, how could I make this blanket and have an impact on my community? And so I came up with several ways on how to sew blankets with local seamstresses that they come in and actually sew them at home so that they can still raise their families, still be involved in the community, and not leave their 3 children to daycare that they couldn't afford. So I thought, how can I make this work for the community and the world in making a better blanket?
That's so cool.
That's really incredible. What an incredible group of people. I'm just so excited for all that we get to chat about. I'm gonna jump in. Filmmaking is a resource-intensive craft, as we know. As we move into a new era of production, why should sustainability be viewed as a creative opportunity to work more intentionally rather than just a set of budget-draining restrictions? And I think there are implications in other businesses as well that can fit into this general idea.
It's definitely resource intensive. And you know, we've heard a lot of conversation this year at something that's around impact and the impact that storytelling in films can have. But it doesn't quite work if the way that we run our processes aren't also representative of that. So there is certainly a call to action there to align the intention of the storytelling with sustainable practices and ethical practices. And I know we'll get to it a little bit later, but it actually, now there are a lot of incentives, financial incentives and otherwise, to adopt these kinds of practices. And I'm really, really grateful that that's slowly starting to become a part of this.
Slowly but surely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think every company can start making decisions from the beginning of even when they start the company or make minor changes that don't actually cost much more. Some examples that come to mind are your vendors who you're purchasing from. If their missions are aligned with your sustainability initiatives, then that's one of the easiest things to pivot to. We work with a local bank called Beneficial State Bank, and they are divested from oil, and that was a huge reason why we chose to do banking with them. So it's a small, tangible example that didn't cost us anything else. It was just deciding to go with them as our bank.
that's a really creative approach to be implementing something even into the business, like the real business part of your company. I really like that.
It's foundational, kind of.
As I think about the question, and I'm trying to think of all the different elements that Minky Couture has that kind of produces and does sustainable product in every element that we do. Early on, when I started Minky, several of the people that I asked for their advice actually told me this couldn't be done because I wanted to be hands-on in the production, in the fulfillment, in the creation. Creation of the actual designing of the product. And so the sustainability, I feel like, is from actually the thought and the concept of a new product and developing it all the way through with our hands-on and how we include the community and other businesses and our employees and our customers and make it, come full circle.
Absolutely. I think a big thing we've talked about this weekend in a lot of our conversations is that, film is in a very, the industry is shifting right now, right? And not for the first time, but we're all living through it now. And I think we have so much to learn from other industries. And there is a lot of benefit in looking at what are other industries doing and how can we implement those same practices and learn from them as we're seeing our own shift in our specific work. And so I think that's really cool. Do you guys, can you provide a case study where adopting sustainable practices actually has saved a project money rather than increasing the budget? Because I think a lot as a producer and just the general conversation for producers is, then it's just like, that's gonna cost me more money and you're trying to keep your budget, and independent versus corporate, there's so much there, so. Absolutely,
and this is one that I'm excited to talk about because we're finally reaching a point where, again, a lot of those sustainable solutions are actually really financially motivated as well. A dear directing friend of mine named Adam Hersko recently went out, it was to do his feature, his debut, with a pretty sizable 100-person crew, and elected to run the entire set on batteries. It's a pretty big shift for the film industry because so much of what we do, from travel to the generators that are used to power the lights, traditionally is run on diesel. And so there was a lot of nervousness around it, even though on paper it was going to cost less. There was obviously some risk aversion. What if something went wrong? What if a truck shut down? He ended up getting that pushed through, saving the production thousands of dollars in the process and reducing their emissions at the same time. And I love talking about this example because we're arriving at a point where people need to look at these case studies to be able to justify it at bigger scales. And I do want to continue to try and share as many of those as possible to convince people who naturally are risk averse that this is not only cheaper and more sustainable, but also oftentimes safer.
Yeah, I think sometimes what holds us back is just the unknown and the fear of the unknown. Yeah. And even when we're seeing it laid out on paper, say I'm showing you why this is going to save money, there can still be pushback just because it's 100%. Newer and not proven, But yeah. That case study alone is so great for any of us trying to implement these changes because look, it worked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Once it works, then you get to, every time it works, it just supports the concept more.
On another production, they employed a hybrid fleet as opposed to traditional 4x4 trucks, and that also saved not only a ton of money, but was much better for the environment. So those kinds of changes at this point in time are actually financially feasible. And then the last piece that I'll add to it, and I kind of hinted at this before, but there's this whole new world of investment that's opened up for projects that are both sustainable in practice and are espousing messages that have to do with sustainability. And those things, can obviously be extremely beneficial to getting productions off the ground. So there are a lot of carrots in play now for producers to make these shifts, and all we need to do is keep talking about them and getting the word out that this is now possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as before we were chatting, and you told me about that case study, what my mind went to is that it's all calculable. So your carbon impact for travel, the diesel that you burn, your waste streams, they can all be calculated pretty simply. And some folks who do environmental impact reports, this is what they do all day. And when calculating the amount of energy that you'll need to run your production, it's a finite number calculated in kilowatts, kilowatt hours.
You can actually break it down numerically and just
so
the data.
Yeah, and the data's there, and once you've done it, then you know it, and that's something that you can then go and share with the people who would have to know, whether that's regulatory agencies or investors or whoever, or even just the community that you're inviting yourself into, saying like, hey, like we care about you, and this is what we're trying to do to mitigate it with a very clear number.
Calculable number,
Yeah. Do you mind if I tag onto that just for a second? Because it's true that, not just for this, but for most problems, it starts with data. And it is perhaps the lowest hanging fruit. Even if your production isn't adopting any sustainable practices, it's really important that we start to measure these kinds of things so that we can have an idea of what sort of the standard is that we're moving away from and where the areas that we need to target are most important. So I definitely think that even for productions where some of these solutions aren't feasible, the least you can do is track those different metrics and also share them with other productions.
And sometimes just seeing that number on the spreadsheet is enough to be like, wait, maybe I should drop that.
Very driven by those numbers.
Yeah.
And I feel like my product is totally tangible and a little bit different than theirs, but when I look at sustainability, we're actually in the process right now of doing some research for new packaging and packaging. During COVID, we had to repackage everything, so it was, and we've stayed with that for the time being, but we're in the process of looking for that. And I look at our fulfillment, and not just packaging, but shipping and trucking and all the things that go with that, with fuel and all those things that you can measure that are black and white on paper and spreadsheets. All those things add to your bottom line to try and do a sustainable way that helps the environment, helps the world, helps everyone that you're serving.
Absolutely. We were speaking yesterday about how there are films that have implemented mental health services on set so that their cast and crew and everyone feels more supported in that way, and just the hope that we would see that happening more and more, the same way that you're going to have craft services on your roster of like vendors, that would just become...
We do crafts.
Craft service, yeah. That was a great joke. But yeah, the same way you have all of your different crew, that we would implement mental health. And I think this is another area where we could see that progress being made, where you're just implementing different people who this is their job, their day in, day out is just tracking those numbers so we know what it is. And if that becomes the industry standard, I think sometimes in any industry, it can be like, if we just don't talk about it, then we just don't have to talk about it. And so the more other people start talking about it, and this is if you are reporting your environmental impact on your film, then it kind of forces other people to start engaging with it, because if it's being done, and if you're not, it almost is like, okay, so why are you not? And so I think
transparency to it.
Yeah, and so I think the more that people start implementing these practices, the more we'll see people who might not be inclined to implement kind of being nudged along.
No doubt.
We just talked about it, the low-hanging fruit changes that an indie production and business leaders can make today to significantly reduce their carbon footprint without requiring new technology. We were talking about sometimes it can be overwhelming. You look at it like, well, I can't change every single part. I can't have our dishes all be compostable and have everything electric vehicles and, like all these things. But if you change one thing on your next production and then you change two things on the one after that, you're still doing more than if you did nothing. Mm-hmm. And so I think I know we've talked about it a bit, but if there are things that really stand out to you, that like this is an area where we can see that changing in business, whether it's your processing or packaging or transport, like the things that really stand out to you as really because we want these conversations to be really tangible for filmmakers.
Almost automatically dominoes anyway.
Exactly.
If you change one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I wanted to say something back to the mental health thing. I do believe that it's very important when I want to create a space, mental health, where my employees feel heard and appreciated and comfortable and safe, I don't know how that translates on a set.
It definitely does.
But it's very important to me as I would hope they would agree with me.
You have quite a bit of them here with you, so
do.
I would say that they probably are here to support you genuinely.
I just feel like they need to be involved in the process too and be heard, and they have ideas, and I found that sometimes, not always, probably most times, 99% of the time, their ideas are actually, better than mine, or they can do better than I can. But putting your heads together and finding solutions and making it a place that people love to come to work. Whether it's food, environment,
yes,
hugs, whatever.
We spoke about that on another panel, and just the collaboration and the idea of the best idea wins. And it's not about ego, and it's not about this is how I want to do it, because that can come up in any business.
Yes.
But just being willing to enter the space, the conversation of like, okay, how do we collaboratively come up with the best solution? Because there's so much value in multiple perspectives, and
you get a better result every time.
Every time. Yeah.
To that point, we've also seen a new role appear, particularly for productions that can afford it, in the form of a sustainability coordinator, whose job it is to think through all of this and provide reports for producers and the production office, and make those kinds of recommendations. And it definitely benefits to have somebody on the team who is focused on these kinds of things, so that it doesn't, actually impede anybody else.
Because it could go right by somebody else's radar when you've got a group over here dying, going, can't he see this? It's killing us.
Yeah.
But when it's everyone working together, and when you
that
implement that
coordinator.
role. And I think for independent films, it's like, okay, well, we have such a low budget. How do we implement that? But even if you could implement that for a half-day rate, where someone was just willing to give you a half day of their time, and it's not everything. They're not on set every day making sure everything is running, but you've done something, right?
Yeah, and even for the smallest of films, oftentimes people are doubling up on their roles anyway, but just to have somebody who's a part of the team, who is thinking about this, to initiate that collaboration with the other departments is kind of key.
Absolutely.
And coming out of college with an environmental studies degree, I can say I would have taken that day, right? Definitely. There's one thing that very tangible to think about that I've been thinking is managing waste streams. So after you're done, whatever you didn't use, where does it go? There are hundreds of food redistribution organizations who already have infrastructure in place to come pick up unsold products from grocery stores, from school cafeterias, from hospitals, anywhere that does a large production of food. There's organizations and apps that connect people to these redistribution organizations, and they get that food onto plates.
There is one that I wish I could remember the name right now, but there is an organization specifically for film sets where they're coming and picking up, because your meals, there's so much waste on set through craft and meals, and they are picking it all up and they're distributing it to others. Like, there's no...
The infrastructure's there.
Exactly. I'm gonna look up the name of that organization, because it's specifically for this industry, which is so cool.
There's also one that a school that we work with got a bunch of LED grow lights.
Oh yeah.
That we were able to help them set up to start an indoor edible garden. From a set that was like a futuristic.
Oh, wow.
That's so cool.
And they built these hydroponic systems that didn't actually work, so I had to do a little bit of work to help them out.
But now they do.
But now they do. And so there's also an org, I don't know the name, but maybe if I find
we'll
it.
put them up.
We'll put it up.
Yeah.
But managing waste streams and just starting to track it, like what you were saying. It's just like how much, in terms of like just pounds of food waste did you generate on your project, because that also has a very clear known environmental, like measurable environmental impact, that if you just stop doing that, that's already bringing you like up.
Yeah, I think it's just like pick one, right? Like I think that's my like in this conversation for filmmakers who are like I don't really know, or like just pick one thing. buy reusable water bottles for your set. Like, put people's names on them. Like, one little thing that you're not throwing away tons of plastic water bottles. That's like a step.
You do that. But you name when you solo cup.
Yeah.
Don't use toothpicks.
So, does a commitment, I think this is an area where we would see the creative pushback. We've talked about it a lot about the business financial pushback that it kind of comes with it, but does the commitment to sustainability on set, can it influence the creative choices or the on-screen messages of the film itself? What are the ways that we can see that implemented on either side of the camera?
Well, certainly this kind of ties back to my initial point about movies that are trying to have a positive impact, also trying to reflect that in their processes, and it does flow both directions. Movies that are implementing these sorts of practices and are thinking about it collaboratively in that way are much more likely to imbue the storytelling with a backdrop of climate philosophy and sustainability, even if the story itself isn't necessarily about climate directly. There's a lot of ways where that thinking can show up in everyday life. And it's all the more present on set where a lot of those creative choices are being made. And so there's kind of a happy marriage, happy relationship between the two parts of this. I will also take this moment to say that there is another team playing for the other side here. There are a lot of productions that are supported by organizations that have not divested from oil, and in fact, quite the opposite. The oil business has never been investing more in film and storytelling. And that certainly influences the messaging of those productions just as much. So there's an ever-present need for the counter-narrative to also show up and be implemented as processes on set.
That's a great point.
And I can just, this personal anecdote was in 2010-ish, Food Inc. came out. It was a documentary that lots of people have seen. And it was hugely impactful on me personally, on just my first exposure to what our industrialized food system actually is, how it affects the environment and also farmers. And since that moment, I had already been interested in gardening, but at that point, it really became a mission, which influenced my decisions with schooling and then my career path since then. So like, yeah, don't get me wrong, Food Inc. has some things that have been since updated, so some of the information there, it doesn't, but I guess that's the point, like it doesn't have to be perfect. As long as you're telling a story and you're coming from like an authentic place where you're saying, hey, this is something that's in the world, this is something that matters and it's worth talking about. You might have an ability to have a like cascade impact to someone like me who dedicates their life to food sustainability and very plugged in and very active.
A walking anecdotal example of why that storytelling is important.
Right.
Exactly.
And not about oil.
Yeah. I mean, how do you implement, like, you guys are also telling a story, right? Like, all of your marketing is telling a story, and I would love to hear ways that you guys are kind of, and I think it maybe is in what you've already explained about how you treat your employees and how you work locally and all of that.
That's kind of wide. No, I just enjoy, I'm taking notes of things to watch when I get back. Our food.
Yeah.
We do feed the warehouse and all of corporate each day, and so it's funny. Some days we have 0 left, some days we have a gob left, but you know, what do we do with that?
And that's the whole point of this conversation, right? Like, is
yes,
that we would all walk
where,
away.
Where's that food going?
Yeah.
I try and send it home with people, at least so we know it's not in the garbage. But
Yeah, and that's great. That's
Yeah.
a great way to implement it, I think. Yeah.
Sometimes it's that simple.
Yeah, and that's what I go back to is like some of these answers are very simple, but do we do them?
Exactly.
You know?
And I think that's the point of our conversation, right?
Right.
Is just how can we simplify something that I think sometimes things are overcomplicated to make them feel bigger than they are, so that it would keep us from growing and
Yes,
progressing.
one thing that we do, I feel like that's sustainable, that we're always working towards is our giving back arm is the Heart of Minky. And so I was trying to think of the philanthropic, and I always say it wrong.
You're good.
Yeah. No, my tongue gets twisted and going, should I say it? But we give back to NICU units throughout the United States, these little infant blankets that are the size of an incubator that are these, we do about 5,000, 6,000 a month. So we do about 60,000 a year that go into these incubators that give these babies that first tactile smell of their mom blanket that moms lay with them, and that whole just that whole process of giving back to giving that best fight for life of that newborn that is struggling the most of all of us, and the sweet responses that we get, and how these babies are growing up to be, you know, now 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, and they still have their first little teeny Minky. But we try to make an impact that way with, you know, 60,000. I think, well, there's a baby to go with each one of those. That's a lot of
and a family,
struggling
and a mom,
baby,
and
a family,
right,
and a grandma, and a grandpa, and siblings. So,
and I know those little things impact families in
they
the
do impact
biggest way
families
because
and give them hope.
it helps them to feel seen.
Yes.
And it's even, I think a lot of people don't feel seen.
Yeah,
so
and that that somebody's thinking about them to give them something to fight for that baby that has that voice.
That's incredible. I think that's such a great way, and I think that giving back is such a huge part of this conversation, right? Whether it's giving out the food that's left over or just finding other, I know Matthew's company, what's the giveaway?
We just crunched the numbers, 250,000 plants donated for free to Los Angeles last year, and it's
Congratulations.
thank you.
What was the number?
250,000.
That's a lot.
Hoping to hit 500,000 this next year. So it's all of our unsold stock. We do around 10 to 25,000 seedling production every week out of our nursery in Redondo Beach, and only 60 to 80% of that sells, and then it sizes out, and it would either need to be potted up, which we don't have the infrastructure to do at this point, and we probably couldn't sell that many potted plants anyway, but we needed to have that on hand in order to meet the needs of our customers. So whatever doesn't get sold, 65 organizations, schools, nonprofits, and community gardens came through last year, and each one of them gives out to their community. So it's like a hub and spoke sort of model. So.
And it's food, it's edible.
And they're all edible.
Yeah. So people are all over LA are learning how to grow what they eat, which is, you know, I think a huge, and that's been part of your philosophy of this business from the very beginning before it was formed, honestly. And so
honestly, before that, the idea was LA's free nursery, an anarchist free nursery. That was the original incarnation. And then I got a business partner, and he was like, "Well, what if people paid you to do that?"
And you still get to do it.
And we give away way more than my anarchist backyard nursery would have given away. So he was right.
And the collaboration is where that came from, right?
Collaboration is super important, and working with community is super important. I think then within sustainability, the only option we have is if we focus on community.
To work together. Absolutely. Yes. How do we take the lessons learned on small scale indie sets and small businesses and apply them to large scale projects without losing efficiency? And I think this is interesting because it feels like this would be much easier to implement at the corporate level because there's the finance behind it that you could, whereas indies and small businesses don't necessarily have that support available as readily. But I think a lot of times we do see this where they do have to learn from the smaller, because if you can do it like this, then you can definitely implement it there, right?
Well, there's economies of scale, for sure. If you're buying, if you're sending, one thing on an empty plane versus a whole plane that's full of stuff, the economies of scale definitely kick in, and LEED certified buildings do make a difference when you're talking about whole studios.
I think there's also different incentives as well at that level. Sort of the legacy of Hollywood has always been a slash and burn operation, especially overseas. And that's been the reputation, and so there's a lot of places in the world that are hesitant or skeptical to introduce film tax credits and things like that because they're worried about their environments and ecosystems. And so there's certainly responsibility for the bigger studios to try as much as they possibly can to adjust the narrative by implementing these practices, and I believe it to be worth spending on at least a little bit to try and change that discourse globally. And for my executive friends, my biggest recommendation to them always is no more private jets for A-list talent. Thank you. Yeah, I think that that sort of stuff. Transport is oftentimes the biggest expense in terms of pollution for productions, and that's easily the single change that exactly they can and they're willing oftentimes to fly first class if that's the rationale behind it. And it also saves productions money. So as much as we can avoid private airfare, private jet travel at that highest level, the better. And then obviously there's a cascade of other solutions that can be implemented. But that one in particular is not only kind of a hot topic at the moment with folks like Taylor Swift being tracked on Twitter for all their jet movements, but it's also the lowest hanging fruit and a very symbolic step that could be taken.
I know Matthew and I were chatting recently, and he was like, the very first thing that comes to mind is transportation, because it's a huge, just such a significant draw on.
And there are no battery-powered jets quite yet.
And it's trackable. That carbon impact is super trackable.
It's worth mentioning too, at the highest level, you can use carbon credits to also help offset, even if you can't reduce. There are ways with where you can work with the carbon tax market to try and offset some of that pollution that comes from these really big productions. And there are now markets for those kinds of credits, so that other companies who are maybe doing things more sustainably can be rewarded for that through the purchase of these carbon credits.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to hear from you how, because I just love what you briefly mentioned about how you guys are working locally, and I would love to hear a bit more about that, because I think that fits into this. And
we're kind of in a crossroads right now where we're growing substantially. So when you say, what does that look like as you go into the corporate world and getting bigger, I feel like my biggest hesitation is you lose that community feel. You lose that I can make a decision in a second, or I don't have to go through 5 levels of people to say, can I get back to the local school? Well, we got to think about it. And there's a lot of other components to it, but the one that jumps out at me always is just working with your community and have a pulse of what's going on and lending a hand. And even as you look at the community as the whole United States, we are often first to respond to a national disaster, whether it be a fire, a hurricane, a tornado, a flood, some of those unthinkable things. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like those ways of reaching out and touching people and helping them in those crisis moments is it seems like it would be out of reach and out of your ability to really help. So I'm doing that dance. Like, how big do I want to get? And my goal is to blanket the world, so I'm thinking, I got to get bigger.
But
That's a great double entendre.
I think that just your thought process in it is the answer, right? Like that you're thinking about it, you're talking about it, you're figuring out what it looks
important
like. And
to me and everyone at Minky.
It's so clear, like that's so obvious, and I really love so much of this conversation. We've been able to talk about the humanness of this conversation, because what we have the data, and it makes it very scientific and very numeric and very measurable, but there is a very strong human aspect to this, and I think as we have maybe lost our humanity a little bit as a society, that these conversations are all the more important when we view ourselves as a collective whole versus the individualistic perspective, which maybe the West here struggles with. But there are other cultures who do view themselves as a group, whether it's a family or a local community or a tribe, like that perspective has such a huge impact on this conversation. And I think the more we bring it back to that, pairing it with the data and the science and the numbers, like that's where I think we all really will see the progress, and it comes from each person doing that, right? So
Yeah,
a
I couldn't agree
collective.
more. And I really appreciate bringing up the international piece of this, because my company specializes in those international co-productions. And when we enter into those agreements, we're oftentimes working with local companies who have a much better idea of how to approach sustainability for their own territories or countries or cultures. And so a big part of this also is being receptive to those folks and hopefully countering that narrative that Hollywood is a destructive force when it enters into these kinds of communities.
Yes.
Climate solutions can be as clever, creative, scientifically sound as you want, but if you don't take stakeholders who are actually going to be living with that climate solution into consideration, then there are so many cases, whether it's within rural fishing communities, whether it's in rainforest management, if it's development in even like the Midwest of the US, like these things do not work, and the initial funding ends up running out and you're left with a half-done project. And there's so many cases across so many industries where the stakeholders weren't considered, and how the people who'd be living with those decisions, it just wasn't even considered at all. So it's so important.
And conversely, there's also the incentive as well. If you want to shoot in the rainforest, it's a non-starter to have to think about these things, and you'll often be given extra permissions if you show that this is a part of the process. Again, just thinking about the carrots for those of us who have to make those decisions.
And need to sell why those decisions are being made, right?
Yeah.
To the people
100%.
we're having to answer to. Everyone has to answer to someone on it.
Right, if you're not thinking about these things, you may not be able to shoot in some of those places, and rightfully so.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to hear, just to wrap up, if you just, like, I think we've had so much tangible conversation. There's so much good to take away from everything that we have chatted about. But if there was just one last thing that you wanted to kind of leave people with about what they can be implementing in their business or their production or anything, just one last.
Absolutely. I'd love to speak to the filmmakers in the room if there are any who are curious in this. It's a bit of an open challenge right now to tell climate stories. We've seen a few of them work. We've seen many more of them not work at scale. There are a couple great examples of it working at various budget levels. For those of you who've seen Twisters, which is a movie about tornado chasers, in the Midwest, that had such an alignment with the science and the real human impact of climate change, and led by Glenn Powell, who, if you haven't seen his face, he's a perfect spokesperson for this kind of stuff to really reach people who may otherwise not be interested in that kind of messaging. But the film is not dominated by that climate narrative. It's a great story. On a smaller scale, there was another film called How to Blow Up a Pipeline. It's based on the book of the same name. That's about a bunch of young folks going out into the desert in Texas to try and blow up an oil and gas pipeline. But the real human part of that story, again, is tracking why these 7 very, very different people were impacted in all these different ways and what led them to that sort of radical decision. And so, those films were largely supported by the scientific community, had a lot of investment come out of Silicon Valley and elsewhere that are similarly aligned with this sort of stuff. And so I would encourage any filmmakers and producers to seek out that financing, to think about stories that make sense with a climate backdrop, and to see it for the advantage that it is, that there's a lot of money and resources for these kinds of projects that are trying to do good.
I think those stories are super important. I mean, personally, yeah, I think it's so important to tell stories about the environment from an authentic position, and hopefully clever and fun to watch. That don't beat you over the head with the fact that we are in an environmental crisis right now. Right. It's true, but calm down. My 2 things to think about are, and any business can do this, is who are your vendors? Are they mission aligned? Can you get a different insurance company? Can you switch to something that is more aligned with your ethics, with your mission, with your goals, with your direction? Packaging companies, shipping, whatever it is. Are there other options that are more mission aligned that you can just switch to? And then second is considering waste streams. every industry generates waste, and what do you do with that waste? And can you potentially serve the community with that, which otherwise might be waste?
Excellent. I think when creating a business anytime, I do think you need to think about not only the idea that you have, but kind of your core values and your North Star and where you're going to go with it, and setting it up from the beginning. And creativity has no age limit, and I say that a lot. You can be as young with creative ideas or as old, and you can make a big impact in your community by the things that are important to you, and enlisting people that have those same core values, and whether it's your vendors, your banks, because we vet all those too, and it's important. I didn't know how important it was, but now I do, because you told me it was. So, yes, and I do think, you can make small things make big differences. And ordinary things can become extraordinary, and I think you don't have to be a brain surgeon to come up with changes to make sustainable differences.
Yeah, to make it better, right?
Just
not
make it
perfect,
better. It's never going to be perfect, and you just always have to pivot, and if it doesn't work, try something else that's better, that you think is better, that can help with what you're trying to achieve.
That you know where you're going.
Yes,
Yes,
since you know where you're going, but sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And don't be afraid to try it, right?
Right.
You can try one thing.
I find that's that the biggest downfall of so many people are just afraid to give it a try.
Within my industry, plants, telling people to grow food, lots of people are scared. And what we realized, I think we actually talked about like a month ago at Cerca, we said, most people just want permission to try. That's it.
They do. And a little pat on the back saying, go try it.
Yeah. You got
It'll
this.
work, you got it.
Yes. We got you. Got this.
Just one support person can just give you miles.
Yeah. Matthew's my brother, which I don't know if we've actually chatted about, but I did not inherit the green thumb that he inherited. And I was like, Matthew, my plants are dying. What do I do?
Good.
And when he told me, do you remember what you told me, Matthew?
What was it?
What do you remember what you told me when I asked you?
Oh, kill plants?
Yes. He goes, kill your plants, let them die. Plants die. Keep trying to grow more. And I was like,
the more plants you kill,
okay.
the more plants you try to grow. And eventually you...
Don't try to kill them. He wasn't telling me to try to kill the plants.
I know,
Then I'm a master botanist.
Maybe try. Just try one. Also feel your soil.
Just that. I was gonna-
Fingers in soil.
He's like, is your soil dry? He's like, yeah, they need water. This one is way too wet.
You got
It
10
needs less
highly
water.
sophisticated, very advanced moisture sensors on the ends of your arms.
10 little botanists. So yeah, I think that's really the heart of this, is just make the effort to try new things, and if they don't work, it's okay, try something else. And so thank you guys so much. This has been so insightful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've just loved this conversation, so really appreciative. Thank you guys all so much for joining us, and yeah.